You scoop out a spoonful of yogurt this morning. It says probiotic on the label. You don't think twice about it. You swallow it, move on with your day, and somewhere in your gut, trillions of bacteria go to work on whatever you just fed them. You probably think this is a modern discovery. It isn't. The real answer is far stranger. Long before anyone had a microscope, before anyone had a word for bacteria, people were already managing an invisible world inside their own bodies. They just didn't know they were doing it. They only knew what worked. Right now, inside you, there are more bacterial cells than there are cells that are actually you. That number is almost impossible to picture. An entire hidden population, living in the dark, humid environment of your intestines, doing chemistry your own cells can't do alone. You never elected this population. You never designed it. You simply inherited it, and you feed it, meal by meal, whether you mean to or not. For most of human history, nobody knew any of this. There was no word for microbiome. There was no concept of bacteria at all. And yet, somehow, the choices people made about food kept that hidden population healthier than yours probably is right now. Not because they understood biology, because they had no other option. Somewhere in northern Europe, in a peat bog that never quite lets go of what falls into it, a body was placed into the dark water thousands of years ago. The cold, oxygen-starved mud did something remarkable. It preserved skin. It preserved hair. It preserved fingernails. And it preserved, almost perfectly, the last meal that person ever ate. When researchers eventually pulled that body from the bog and studied its stomach, they didn't find meat. They didn't find anything close to a modern diet. They found a porridge, barley, flax, the seeds of a weedy little plant called knotweed. Dozens of different plant species, all cooked down together into a single dense meal, eaten in the final hours of that person's life. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a special occasion meal. It wasn't a feast prepared for someone important. Researchers believe it may have even been consumed shortly before a ritual death, which means it likely reflected an ordinary, everyday diet, not a rare exception. Whoever prepared that porridge wasn't optimizing anything. They were simply cooking with what the land gave them that season, and what the land gave them happened to be extraordinarily varied. Compare that to your own week. How many separate plant ingredients do you think passed through your kitchen? 5? 8? A body from thousands of years ago, with none of your access to global shipping or year-round produce aisles, was eating a wider range of plants in a single bowl than most people eat in an entire week today. Why does that matter to you? Because of what that porridge did once it reached the gut. Every one of those grains and seeds carried fiber. Not the kind of fiber your body digests, but the kind your gut bacteria digest for you. That distinction is bigger than it sounds. Your own cells can only break down so much of what you eat. The rest gets handed off to the trillions of microorganisms living in your intestines, and what you feed them determines who thrives down there and who starves. A diet built from dozens of different plants doesn't just feed one type of bacteria. It feeds many. And a gut with many different types of bacteria behaves differently than a gut dominated by just a few. Here's where it gets stranger. Modern researchers wanted to know what a gut like that actually looks like in a living person, not a preserved body in a bog. So they went looking for populations who still eat the way that ancient body once did. Broad, varied, plant-heavy, foraged rather than manufactured. They found the Hadza, a community of hunter-gatherers in Tanzania whose diet still shifts with the seasons, built from wild tubers, berries, and whatever the land offers that week. Research institutes that studied their gut bacteria found something that should unsettle anyone eating a typical Western diet today. The bacterial diversity inside a Hadza gut was dramatically higher than the diversity inside the average industrialized gut. Not slightly higher, dramatically higher. And it wasn't static. Their gut bacteria actually changed with the seasons, expanding and shrinking to match whatever plants were available to eat. During the wet season, certain bacterial populations flourished. During the dry season, when the available tubers and berries shifted, those populations reseeded and others took over. Their internal ecosystem was breathing in rhythm with the land around them. Your gut, by comparison, mostly stays the same. Week after week, month after month. Because you mostly eat the same narrow rotation of foods sourced from a supermarket that offers the illusion of variety while selling you the same handful of crops over and over, repackaged into 1,000 different shapes and flavors. Does that sound familiar? A cereal box, a piece of bread, and a plate of pasta look like 3 different meals. To your gut bacteria, they're nearly identical. Different names, different packaging, the same narrow ingredient underneath. Variety on the surface, sameness underneath. Around the same time researchers were studying the Hadza, a separate research effort was underway back in industrialized countries. Scientists launched a large citizen science project asking thousands of ordinary people to send in samples of their own gut bacteria, along with detailed records of what they ate. The pattern that emerged was almost too clean to be a coincidence. People who ate a wider range of plant types each week, not just more vegetables, but more different kinds of vegetables, grains, and legumes, consistently showed richer, more diverse gut bacteria. People who ate the same narrow set of foods, even if those foods were technically healthy, showed far less diversity. Variety mattered more than any single superfood ever could. That finding surprised a lot of people because it broke the usual health advice down to something almost embarrassingly simple. It wasn't about eating more kale. It wasn't about cutting out sugar entirely. It was about how many different plants showed up on a plate across a given week, regardless of how healthy each individual item was considered to be. A person eating 15 different modest plants was doing more for their gut than a person eating one perfect superfood every single day. That ancient porridge, the one pulled from a stomach preserved in a bog for thousands of years, wasn't nutritionally sophisticated by accident. It was built from whatever grew nearby, gathered across an entire landscape rather than a single field. It fed a gut the same way the Hadza still feed theirs today. Wide, varied, unintentionally complete. You live in the opposite world. A world engineered for convenience, not diversity. A small number of crops now make up the overwhelming majority of calories eaten worldwide. Wheat, corn, rice, soy. Everything else has been pushed to the margins of the plate, packaged into snack aisles as an afterthought rather than a foundation. Your ancestors didn't know they were feeding bacteria. They didn't have a name for what they were doing. They just knew that eating one thing and one thing only left them weaker, sicker, less able to survive a hard season. So they ate broadly because broadly was what worked. It kept them alive. It just also happened to keep something else alive, too, something invisible, something they would never see in their lifetime. Somewhere along the way, that instinct got engineered out of your life. Convenience replaced variety. Shelf life replaced seasonality. In your gut, the same organ your ancestors were unknowingly cultivating with every varied meal, quietly narrowed. This is where the twist gets uncomfortable, because the shift wasn't just about digestion. Researchers studying gut bacteria have increasingly connected microbial diversity to far more than digestion. Immune regulation, inflammation levels, even mood and stress response have been linked, in various studies, to the state of the bacteria living in your intestines. A narrower gut doesn't just mean less efficient digestion. It may mean a body less equipped to regulate itself in ways science is still working out. None of this means you need to go dig up bog porridge recipes or move to Tanzania and forage for tubers. That's not the point. The point is smaller and stranger than that. The point is that your ancestors never had to think about gut health as a concept because their circumstances made variety unavoidable. They didn't have refrigerated trucks delivering the same 3 crops to every corner of the world. They had whatever grew nearby in that season on that patch of land and nothing else. Scarcity, in a strange twist, produced diversity. Abundance, in an even stranger twist, has produced sameness. You live in the most food-abundant era in human history, and somehow your gut may be less diverse than the gut of a person who lived in a peat bog 3,000 years ago. That isn't a failure of willpower. It's a side effect of a food system built for shelf life, transportation, and profit margins, not for the trillions of organisms quietly living inside your intestines. The point is that the people who lived thousands of years before refrigeration, before agriculture as you know it, before any concept of nutrition science, were already doing something you now pay wellness companies to teach you how to do. They were feeding an invisible ecosystem without knowing it existed. They just called it dinner. You can still do the same thing they did, even without knowing every mechanism behind it. Every different plant you add to a week's worth of meals is, in a very real sense, an offering to a version of your ancestors' gut that still lives inside you. Every narrow, repetitive plate is a quiet departure from what once kept a body functioning through hard winters and harder seasons. Think about your own week. How many different plants actually made it onto your plate? Not how many vegetables. How many different ones? For most people, the honest answer is smaller than they'd like to admit. That gap, the space between what your gut evolved to expect and what it actually receives, didn't open overnight. It opened slowly, meal by convenient meal, until an entire population forgot what its own ancestors understood by instinct alone. So the next time you eat, you're not just filling your stomach. You're making a decision, whether you realize it or not, about which invisible organisms get to thrive inside you and which ones quietly disappear. That decision was once made for people by necessity, by geography, by whatever the land happened to offer that season. Now it's made by habit, by convenience, by what's fastest to reach for at the end of a long day. You scoop out that spoonful of yogurt this morning, thinking you're doing something modern. But the real answer is far stranger. You're just circling back, however imperfectly, to something the body has known all along.